My brother asked me to lie to our parents to steal $30K, but when I discovered it was all a lie, my father disinherited him, and now he works for me as an employee. I'm 28 years old, working on building what will be my own shipping company, and I still can't believe my older brother tried to use me as a pawn to steal money from our parents. I mean, when I say this was crazy, I'm being understated, because it basically destroyed the relationship we had as a family and left my mom crying for weeks. The thing is, I need to tell this because I feel like I'm going to explode if I don't get it out. And besides my fiancée, Amanda says that talking about this will help me process it, so here goes. I guess I should start at the beginning, or at least where everything started going to hell. My brother Jeremy is 30 years old, 2 years older than me, and we were pretty close when we were kids. You know, we did everything together, had each other's backs, that kind of thing. But like 5 years ago, he met Melissa, married her super fast, like 6 months into dating, and that's when everything changed. It wasn't something immediate, rather it was gradual. Like when a plant is dying slowly and you don't realize it until it's completely dried out. At first, he just started canceling family plans occasionally. Then he stopped coming to Sundays at my parents' house. Then the calls became less and less frequent. And in the end, he basically disappeared from our lives except for showing up at Christmas and birthdays, and not even always. The truth is, Melissa never sat well with me. And it's not that I'm jealous or anything like that, but there was something about her that made me uncomfortable. She was one of those people who's always comparing everything. Like if my mom bought something, she had to mention that her parents had something better, or if we went to dinner somewhere, she knew a more expensive and more exclusive place. And the worst part is she convinced Jeremy that her family was superior to ours. I don't know exactly how she did it, but it worked. Jeremy started spending all holidays with his in-laws, went to all their gatherings, but found excuses not to come to ours. And when my mom complained, he simply said he was busy or that he needed to keep his wife happy. My dad, Lawrence, who's a retired heart surgeon and basically the firmest and most principled guy I know, was furious, but tried not to show it too much. My mom, Sarah, who was a journalist before retiring, blamed herself constantly, thought she had done something wrong raising us, and it was heartbreaking to see her like that. So anyway, fast forward to, 3 months ago. I'd been dating Amanda, 26 years old, for 7 years, and I finally proposed to her. She's amazing, she's super calm and level-headed, supports me in everything, and honestly, I don't know what I'd do without her. And it turns out that right when I proposed, we found out she was pregnant. I mean, it wasn't planned, but it wasn't an unwanted accident either, if you know what I mean. We'd been talking about having kids eventually for years. My parents were euphoric. My mom cried with happiness for the first time in a long time, and my dad hugged me so tight I thought he was going to break my ribs. We decided to have a small celebration at my parents' house to officially announce both pieces of news, and of course we invited Jeremy and Melissa, mostly because my mom insisted they be there. The party was March 15th. I remember it perfectly, because it was a Saturday, and it was unbearably hot. There were 20 people, basically close family and some close friends. Everything was going well, food, laughter, my parents super happy, and then Jeremy and Melissa arrived an hour late. And here's where it gets crazy. As soon as they walked in, Melissa announced loudly that they were pregnant too. Just like that, without asking me if it was okay to steal my moment, she just dropped the bomb. Everyone went quiet for a second, and then started congratulating them. And I just stood there thinking, did they really just do this? But anyway, I tried not to let it bother me. At the end of the day, it's good news too, I guess. After everyone left, Jeremy asked to talk to me alone. We went to the kitchen, and that's where he told me the whole story. Turns out they'd been trying to have a baby for years, had spent $50,000 or more on IVF treatments, and were basically in financial ruin. He told me they were behind on several payments, had credit card debt up to the ceiling, and needed urgent help. And then, and this is what still has me shocked, he asked if I could do something for him. I said, "Sure, brother, what do you need?" And that's when he dropped his plan. He asked me to go to my parents and tell them that I needed money for my business, $30,000 or something like that, and that when they gave it to me, I'd pass it to him. He said we could split the money half and half, as if that made his plan any less disgusting. I stood there staring at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. I said, "Are you asking me to lie to mom and dad to get money from them?" And he responded that it wasn't really a lie because I was starting a business and could use the money. Just that part would go to him. I told him no, that not in a million years was I going to do that, and that besides our parents would lend him the money if he simply asked them directly. That's when he got defensive. He told me he'd asked for help before and that Dad had said no because he didn't approve of his financial decisions and that Melissa would refuse to ask my parents for help because it embarrassed her. I told him then they'd have to find another solution and that I was sorry but I wasn't going to deceive our family. And then, because apparently the night couldn't get worse, he asked me to make him a partner in my shipping company. Just like that. As if it were the most normal thing in the world to ask me for a piece of something I'd been working on for years. I told him no, that he hadn't put in a single cent or worked a single day on this, and that I wasn't going to give him a partnership just because he was desperate. He got really angry. He called me selfish, told me that families should help each other, and left slamming the door. Amanda, who had been listening to everything from the living room, came and hugged me. She told me I'd done the right thing, but I felt terrible anyway, because he's my brother and seeing him that desperate hurt, but I also couldn't do what he was asking. I thought that was the end of it, but it turns out Jeremy doesn't give up easily. Like a week later, he showed up at my house again, this time alone, and had a completely different story. He told me he needed to talk to me about something important, that he'd been thinking a lot about our previous conversation. He told me that when he was applying to universities like 12 years ago, his first choice was a super prestigious school on the East Coast, but that he realized that if he went there, there wouldn't be enough money left for me to go to the university I wanted, so supposedly he sacrificed his dream and went to a cheaper university so I could have my opportunity. And he told me, looking me straight in the eyes, that now I owed him help, that he had made an enormous sacrifice for me, and that the least I could do was reciprocate. And honestly, for a moment I believed him. I felt terrible. Like I thought, my God, my brother sacrificed his future for me and I didn't even know it. But then something didn't add up. Jeremy had gone to a decent university. It's not like he'd gone to a community college or anything. Plus, my parents have money. My dad was a heart surgeon for decades, and my mom also earned well when she worked. It didn't make sense that they couldn't pay for both universities. So instead of just accepting his story, I told him I was going to talk to my parents about it. I went to my parents' house the next day. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because my mom was making that chicken stew she makes on Tuesdays. I told them what Jeremy had said to me, expecting them to confirm his story and make me feel worse for having rejected him. But what happened was completely different. My dad turned red, like I could see the veins in his neck, and my mom went pale. They asked me if Jeremy had really said that, and when I confirmed yes, my dad exploded. Turns out Jeremy had never been accepted to that prestigious university. He hadn't even applied because his grades weren't good enough. And more than that, when they told him he couldn't get in, he'd asked my dad to basically bribe the university to make a large donation so they'd accept him. My dad refused outright because, well, he has firm principles about that kind of thing, and besides, Jeremy didn't even have the grades to stay at a school like that even if he got in. His whole story about sacrificing himself for me was a complete lie, invented to manipulate me and make me feel guilty. I couldn't believe it. I blocked Jeremy's number immediately and warned my parents about his plan to have me ask them for money. My mom started crying, not quiet tears but full sobs, saying she had failed as a mother and didn't understand how Jeremy had become like this. My dad was consoling her, but I could see he was also devastated, though he expressed it with anger instead of sadness. He told me he was going to handle the situation and not to worry, that I should focus on Amanda and preparing for the baby. But Jeremy didn't end there. Like 2 days later, he and Melissa showed up at my house. It was a Friday night. Amanda and I were watching a movie, and suddenly we heard loud banging on the door. When I opened it, there they both were, and Melissa looked furious. They started yelling at me right there at the door, saying I had ruined their life, that because of me now my parents didn't want to help them, that I was a selfish brother who only thought about himself. Jeremy called me a traitor, said I'd turned my back on him when he needed me most, and Melissa added that I'd always been the favorite son, and now I was using that against them. I tried to talk, but they wouldn't let me. They kept yelling, and some neighbors started coming out to see what was happening. Amanda came out and told them to leave or she'd call the police, and they finally left, but not without saying this wasn't over. I closed the door and stood there trembling, not from fear but from pure adrenaline and anger. Amanda hugged me and told me to breathe, that everything was going to be okay, but I knew this was far from over. I called my parents that same night and told them what had happened. My mom cried again on the phone, like I could hear her trying to calm down, but she couldn't. My dad told me they'd crossed a line and that he was going to take action. He didn't tell me exactly what he was going to do, but I knew my dad, and when he says he's going to take action, he means it. A week later, my dad's lawyer contacted Jeremy. He informed him that my dad had updated his will and that Jeremy was going to be disinherited, that he wouldn't receive anything except a collection of antique watches my dad had been saving for him. Everything else, the house, the investments, everything, would go to me and eventually to my son when he was born. Apparently, Jeremy went into total panic because 2 days later he showed up at my house again, but this time alone and with a completely different attitude. He was crying, something I hadn't seen since we were kids. He apologized for everything, said he was desperate and had made terrible decisions, and begged me to help him reconcile with Dad. He said Melissa didn't know he'd come, that this was just between us as brothers, and that he understood if I didn't want to help him but to at least try. And honestly, seeing him like that broke my heart a little, because despite everything he'd done, he was still my brother, the same guy I'd played video games and built blanket forts with when we were kids. I told him I'd talk to Dad but wouldn't promise anything, and that he had to understand he'd burned a lot of bridges and it was going to take real time and effort to rebuild trust. He agreed, said he'd do whatever was necessary, and left. I called my dad that night and told him Jeremy had come to apologize. There was a long silence on the phone, and then my dad said that if Jeremy really wanted to prove he'd changed, he'd have to prove it with actions, not just words. We organized a meeting at my parents' house, just the four of us, without Melissa or Amanda. It was awkward from the start, like the air was so tense you could cut it with a knife. My dad didn't greet him when he came in, just indicated for him to sit down. And then my dad basically humiliated him for like 20 minutes, listing all the times Jeremy had let the family down, all the lies he'd told, all the opportunities he'd wasted. Jeremy just sat there taking it all, crying quietly, not defending himself. When my dad finished, there was another long silence. And then my dad offered him a solution. He told him that if he really wanted to recover his inheritance and his place in the family, he'd have to work under my direction in my shipping company. Not as a partner, but as a regular employee, starting from the bottom, learning the business from scratch, and proving he could be responsible and committed. He told him he'd have to work there for at least 2 years before he'd consider fully restoring his inheritance, and that during that time he'd receive a fair salary but nothing more. He also told him he'd give him enough money to cover his most urgent debts, but that he'd have to pay him back eventually, with interest. Jeremy was quiet for a moment, and I could see he was processing all this. Basically, my dad was offering him a lifeline but with strict conditions, and Jeremy had to decide if his pride was more important than his family and his future. Finally, he nodded and accepted. He said he'd do everything they asked, that he'd prove he could change, and that he appreciated the opportunity. Now, like 3 weeks after all this, Jeremy is working at my company. He arrives early, stays late, does what I ask without complaining, and honestly, he's doing a good job. We don't talk much about personal topics, basically keep everything professional, but there are occasional moments where I see glimpses of the brother I used to know. Melissa apparently isn't happy at all with the situation. My mom told me she feels Jeremy is lowering himself by working for his younger brother, but Jeremy told her he had no other choice, and this was better than losing his family completely. My mom has started to improve. She doesn't cry as much anymore, and has started reconnecting with Jeremy little by little, inviting him to lunch occasionally, calling him to see how he is. My dad is colder, keeps his distance but respects that Jeremy is fulfilling his part of the deal. And me, well, I'm still processing everything. Sometimes I look at Jeremy and feel anger about everything we went through. Other times I feel pity for how complicated his life got. And other times I just feel sadness for the years we lost because of his pride and his decisions. Amanda gave birth a week ago, a beautiful boy we named Lucas, and Jeremy came to the hospital to meet him. He only stayed a few minutes, held the baby carefully, and when he gave him back to Amanda, he had tears in his eyes. I don't know if things will go back to how they were before between Jeremy and me. Probably not. Too many things happened to just forget them. But at least now there's a possibility of rebuilding something, of having some kind of relationship even if it's different from what we had. And I guess that's the best I can hope for right now.